Tonight, a killer rapist set to be freed from jail after decades behind bars in WA. A new report reveals how big companies are ripping off Australian consumers. An innovative solution to water evaporation from WA's drying dams. And Australian cricket great Ricky Ponting to coach in America's T20 League. Good evening, Pamela Medlen with ABC News. One of WA's worst repeat offenders, whose crimes include killing a pregnant woman and her young son, is set to be released after spending decades behind bars. Kingsley Pickett will be subject to dozens of strict conditions, which a Supreme Court judge says should reduce the risk of him reoffending.
It was a crime that caused community outrage, the deaths of 22-year-old Margaret Blurton, who was pregnant, and her 1-year-old son Shane. Her husband Peter was also seriously injured. The family was driving home on Christmas night. Their car was hit by a stolen vehicle being chased by police.
I think about them every day, never goes away. But yeah, we move forward, you get stronger.
The person responsible was Kingsley Pickett. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter, but it would not be his last conviction. His dozens of crimes included raping a woman after he broke into her home. Pickett was again jailed, but before he was released, he was declared a high-risk serious offender and detained indefinitely. His case has been regularly reviewed, and now after decades in custody, a Supreme Court judge has ruled he can be released on a strict supervision order. It will have 45 conditions, including being constantly electronically monitored, keeping a daily diary, reporting regularly to police, abiding by a curfew, and being banned from using illicit drugs and alcohol. Justice Anthony Derrick said he was satisfied that the proposed conditions are sufficiently extensive and stringent to enable the adequate management of the risk Pickett currently presents to the community.
Whilst he's being released under a supervision order, he hasn't really proven that he is in any way regrets any of the crimes that he's committed or really understands the impact that any of those crimes ever had. And so, realistically, did they just release a time bomb back into the community?
The release order will take effect next month, when Pickett is expected to have his first taste of freedom in more than 25 years. Joanna Manar, ABC News.
With a heatwave forecast for Perth and WA's southwest, crews battled an emergency bushfire in Bullsbrook after rising temperatures caused mulch to spontaneously combust. Hundreds of students and staff were evacuated from Bullsbrook College as the blaze threatened the school and nearby homes. Dozens of firefighters and several aircraft were deployed to bring it under control. And at the height of the fire, local man John O'Clark, who was in the area with his water delivery truck, dumped thousands of litres on his neighbour's verges, stopping the blaze from spreading.
Holy fire in Bullsbrook, right outside our house. Yeah, 18,000 litres, so I just keep going back and forward, and it's pretty hectic there at one time. It was pretty hot, and I think the fire was very close. But yeah, it's what you do, I guess, when people are at threat.
The former chair of the ACCC says Australians are being overcharged because of a lack of competition. In a blistering 80-page report into price gouging, Professor Alan Fels took aim at some of Australia's biggest companies, including banks, supermarkets and airlines. He's called on the government to step in, saying Australians are paying too much, too often.
2 for 5 strawberries.
The public outrage is loud and clear.
The big corporations are taking us to the cleaners. It's over for the little fella. It's over.
And now there is higher calls for change.
The Australian government needs to act. Australians are paying prices that are too high, too often. And the cause is weak and ineffective competition.
Professor Fell's report into price gouging is scathing. Its targets include energy retailer AGL, the major supermarkets and Qantas.
They have squandered some of their good name as a national champion.
The founding chair of the ACCC wants to make it an offence to charge excessive prices. a review of the electricity sector's wholesale market, and tougher laws that allow big business to be broken up if they've abused their market power.
Business pricing has contributed significantly to inflation.
The union that commissioned Fell's report is also agitating for change, while big business is claiming bias.
We are extremely sceptical about the report that Professor Fells has produced. I think it's ironic to hold an inquiry like this and to find that it comes out with recommendations for at least another 13 reviews or inquiries.
The Fells report isn't binding, but it does come as the government conducts its own inquiries into merger laws and supermarket pricing. Professor Fells says the vulnerable are paying the price for rising inflation. Charities are being inundated by needy people who can't afford the rising cost of living, like pensioner Peter Richards.
We all matter. It's not just bucks and profit. So you just look at us little people.
Rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. I'm just hoping that big businesses and others can understand the desperate need.
A reminder that profit pushing has a price. Amelia Terzon, ABC News.
King Charles has been seen in public for the first time since his shock cancer diagnosis. The news triggered a flood of well wishes as well as a reunion with his estranged son Prince Harry. Some royal watchers say this diagnosis may help the family heal their well-publicised rift.
The King spotted for the first time since announcing his cancer battle, and he was all smiles. The 75-year-old and his wife waved to onlookers outside Buckingham Palace. All eyes were on the royal reunion. Prince Harry landed in London after learning of his dad's diagnosis, the Duke of Sussex arriving at his father's residence alone and leaving less than an hour later. It's the first time the pair is believed to have met since the coronation in May, but it's understood he has no plans to see his brother, Prince William.
This whole family feud seems a bit silly in my opinion. They should make up and hopefully this brings them together a little bit more.
Many families have grim diagnoses of horrible diseases and what tends to happen is that, you know, you park the minor grievances and get on with the big stuff. So I think he'd be delighted that he's got both of his sons back on home soil.
Other royals were stepping up.
Your Royal Highness, how is the King?
Princess Anne attending multiple public events in England. While well-wishers poured in from around the world, the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reassured the public he's in regular contact with the King and revealed he caught his cancer in the early stages.
Obviously, like everyone else, shocked and sad, and just all our thoughts are with him and his family. And, you know, thankfully, this has been caught early.
There's been no further updates from the palace on the King's health, and it's expected that from this point forward, many details of his treatment and recovery will be kept private.
Charles and Camilla left London for their Sandringham estate in the countryside, where the King can get peace and privacy between treatments. Isabella Higgins, ABC News, London.
A ceasefire in the Israel-Gaza war could be a step closer, with Hamas militants said to be positive about a new framework for a truce. While details of the deal haven't been released publicly, the US has expressed scepticism it'll be accepted by Israel.
A glimmer of hope after 4 gruelling months. Hamas militants react to a proposal to once again pause fighting in the Gaza Strip.
The response includes some comments on the framework, but in its entirety, it is a positive response.
While those involved are not saying much, US President Joe Biden says the demands are being considered.
It seems to be a little over the top. We're not sure where it is. There's a continuing negotiation right now.
The deal, put together by Israel, the US, Qatar and Egypt, is believed to include a 6-week truce and another exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners. It can't come any sooner for Israelis being held captive by Hamas. The IDF has confirmed that 136 hostages remain, with fears that as many as 31 are dead.
The proposal for a ceasefire was sent to Hamas a week ago. It's believed to include a demand that Israel releases thousands of Palestinian prisoners in return for the hostages, a demand that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has previously ruled out.
In Jerusalem, protesters picket the office of the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Israel alleges UNRWA workers were involved in the October 7 attacks. The UN has launched an internal and external investigation. But a probe by Britain's Channel 4 has found no evidence of the claims that led to a tranche of countries, including Australia, withdrawing funds.
What we need to see from UNRWA now is transparent leadership in respect of their activities.
In Rafah, Israel is ramping up its assault. Gaza's southernmost city is home to hundreds of thousands of displaced people. Desperately hoping an end to this conflict is finally in sight. John Lyons, ABC News, Jerusalem.
Investigators say a door that flew off a Boeing 737 MAX shortly after takeoff last month was missing 4 key bolts. The US Transportation Safety Board says the bolts, which are meant to lock the unused door to the fuselage, appeared to be missing. The preliminary findings provide the first official look into what happened after the Alaska Airlines flight took off. The plane made an emergency landing and all 177 people on board escaped with no major injuries. The Federal Aviation Administration says it will hold Boeing accountable for any safety violations.
We've begun an audit of Boeing's production and quality control practices, and we've informed Boeing that the FAA will not grant any production expansion of the MAX until we're satisfied the quality control issues uncovered during this process are resolved.
A US appeals court has found Donald Trump does not have presidential immunity in a landmark legal case in New York. The ruling means Mr. Trump can be prosecuted on charges of plotting to overturn his 2020 election defeat. Mr. Trump had claimed he was immune from charges for acts he said fell within his duties as president. It brings him a step closer to a criminal trial. The case has been paused until at least next week to give Mr. Trump's legal team time to appeal to the US Supreme Court. After 11 hours of deliberations, the mother of an American teenager who shot dead 4 of his classmates has been found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors in the first-of-its-kind trial argued she and her husband failed to prevent the shooting by giving their son a gun and ignoring the warning signs.
A mother found guilty 2 years after her child's violent crimes. Jennifer Crumbly was convicted of 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 1 for every student shot dead by her son.
It was a long time coming, but it's definitely a step toward the accountability like what we've been talking about. It's kind of been our goal the whole time.
Ethan Crumbly has already been sentenced to life in prison for killing his classmates when he was 15 years old. Prosecutors alleged he'd received the gun as a Christmas present from his parents. But when they were called to the school hours before the shooting to discuss a violent drawing he'd done, they didn't take him home or reveal that he'd been given a weapon.
There's a lot of stuff that could have easily thwarted this whole thing. It could have been stopped very easily.
This case is believed to be the first time that a parent in the US has been convicted of such serious offences over a mass shooting carried out by their child. And while gun control advocates hope it sends a warning to other parents, there's also some concern about the precedent it could set.
I understand why a prosecutor would want to try it. I mean, you know, I have children too, and it's terrifying when we drop them off to school. We think they're safe. On the other hand, there's this kind of moral intuition that at some point you can't be responsible for somebody else's behaviour.
Ethan Crumbly's father, James Crumbly, is facing the same involuntary manslaughter charges and will go to trial next month. Jade McMillan, ABC News.
Coming up on 7:30, Sarah Ferguson sits down with opposition leader Peter Dutton.
Was it humiliating for you to have to stand up and support Labor's changes to the tax cuts?
Well, Sarah, we stood up for people that we want to see given assistance, and it's $15 a week. It doesn't start until July, and it addresses some of the damage that Labor's done to the economy.
The lawyer for a police officer charged over the fatal tasering of 95-year-old Claire Nowland says the senior constable intends to plead not guilty to manslaughter. 33-year-old Christian White faced court where a series of other charges, including recklessly causing grievous bodily harm, were withdrawn. Ms Medlen died in hospital last year, a week after she was tasered while holding a knife at a New South Wales nursing home. The case against the officer, who remains suspended from duty with pay, will move to the Supreme Court in April. Governments across Australia are failing Indigenous communities with their closing the gap policies by taking a business-as-usual approach. That's one of the scathing findings from the Productivity Commission. It's called on governments to relinquish power and share it with Indigenous-run organisations to achieve real change.
Across health, education and housing, Aboriginal-run organisations are delivering services every day under the Closing the Gap agreement. Now a damning report is criticising government for not keeping its end of the deal.
The majority of funding relating to services for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people actually doesn't go to the community-controlled sector. It goes to the NGO sector, which is not us.
Aboriginal community-controlled organisations have told the Productivity Commission review of the National Agreement on Closing the Gap it's not working.
The intention was that governments would work with the Aboriginal community-controlled sector, acknowledging that they were underfunded compared to their non-Indigenous counterparts, and that has not yet happened across the entire agreement.
Closing the Gap is 15 years old. But in 2020, governments signed up to a radical overhaul, promising to share power with Indigenous-run organisations. Today's report says governments are unwilling to relinquish control and aren't revealing where and what it's spending money on.
What we need to do is hold Indigenous organisations responsible for the money that the taxpayer is giving them and stop turning a blind eye to make sure that money is being well spent.
Aboriginal community-controlled organisations are already audited. There are really, really strong controls in place.
The Productivity Commission spent 3 years looking into the effectiveness of the 2020 agreement. What was prevalent in the submissions was tension over money.
Yes, we did see examples where funding was given to external bodies outside of the Aboriginal community-controlled sector.
A message noted by the nation's leader.
We'll continue to put forward practical measures in order to close the gap, and we'll be making our statements when the Closing the Gap report is tabled shortly.
Carly Williams, ABC News.
Workers could soon be given the right to disconnect from the office and ignore phone calls and emails after hours. The Federal Parliament appears set to pass new laws granting a right to switch off as part of a broader package of industrial relations reforms.
It's a phone call that can ruin a weekend.
Hello?
And soon, workers will have the right to simply ignore it.
Millions of Australian workers give their time unpaid through their phone or their computer on weekends and outside their paid working time.
Federal Parliament looks set to pass new laws creating a right to disconnect.
What we're simply saying is that someone who's not being paid 24 hours a day shouldn't be penalised if they're not online and available 24 hours a day.
It means that you have the right to refuse to be contacted where it is unreasonable in relation to your work outside your working time.
The new laws will be fairly simple. Employers will still have the right to contact their staff out of work hours, be it via email, text or phone. But workers will have the right to simply ignore it and can't be punished for doing so. The rules recognise there can be good reasons for employers getting in touch, like shift changes or work emergencies. When disputes happen, they will ultimately be decided by the Fair Work Commission.
I think this is really, a triumph of stupidity over common sense.
Business groups and the opposition warn the rules could threaten flexibility in the workplace.
If we're genuine about flexible workplaces, if we're genuine about allowing people to take time off to go and pick up their kids from school, for instance, well then I think we've got to have sensible conversations about what rights and obligations exist.
This wasn't the government's idea. It's something the Greens negotiated into a broader IR package. It includes things like changing the way casual work is defined to better reflect a worker's actual shift patterns and setting minimum standards for gig workers, like a base rate of pay for Uber drivers and food delivery riders. Those are bigger government priorities, but a right to disconnect is something it was happy to add on. Tom Lowry, ABC News, Canberra.
Southern WA's drying climate and hot summers have prompted authorities to find new ways to reduce evaporation from dams. 4 small rural communities in the Great Southern have become the first to trial an innovative and inexpensive solution to losing precious water.
Martin Pearce is literally under the pump. His summer has been hectic.
It's probably about 30% up because the season dried off so quickly.
Answering daily calls for water from South Coast residents whose tanks have run low.
And you hate to see them without water. With the kids, there's no showers, no toilets, so you try and keep them going.
Even on the normally wet South Coast, it's unusually dry.
People saying they've only had 10 mils since the middle of November.
Since the beginning of spring last year, the South West Land Division has received approximately half its average spring and summer rainfall. Roger has had to buy a tank full, but is hoping the weather gods come through.
I don't know how to rain dance, but if I did know how to do a rain dance, I'd do it.
But with southwest rainfall declining 20% over the last 50 years, scientists have developed a simple solution to save water. It's called the Hexacover.
They're made of 100% recycled plastic. You basically place them, thousands of them, on the top of the dam, and they've found in trials that they can reduce evaporation by about 70%. So it's a huge contribution.
The tiny township of Wellstead, east of Albany, started trialling the device 3 years ago. Towns that normally have water carted to them in summer, such as Ravensthorpe, Salmon Gums and Lake King, have benefited from the $2.8 million project.
So certainly around Lake Grace and Newdigate as an example, we're seeing a similar pattern of demand to what we saw in the last really significant event, which was sort of 2019-2020.
Other towns suffering from low rainfall could also see the Hexacover deployed in coming years. Mark Bennett, ABC News, Wellstead.
Researchers are celebrating what they're calling a world-first breakthrough to treat a debilitating autoimmune disease. They've successfully reprogrammed defective cells from lupus patients by inserting a protein from healthy people. Lupus affects 1 in 1,000 Australians. Patient trials are expected to start in Melbourne in 2 years. Researchers are also confident the same method could eventually be used to treat type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis.
We think it's a game changer, completely changed the way we treat not just lupus, but every other autoimmune disease potentially.
To finance now on the planned $80 billion merger between gas giants Woodside and Santos is off. Here's Alan Collar.
Well, Woodside and Santos both said that they decided to end the merger discussions, but the fact that Santos shares fell 5.8% and Woodside went up suggests that Woodside is the dumper and Santos the dumpee. Elsewhere, the online fashion retailer Satir delivered a pretty good result and the shares jumped 25%. And NAB appointed a new CEO, Andrew Irvine, who's been running NAB's business bank for 3.5 years, having been hired from the Bank of Montreal. He takes over in April from Ross McEwen, who came from the Royal Bank of Scotland 4 years ago. Now, here's a chart of the Big Four bank share prices rebased to December 2019 when Ross McEwen took over. There was a moment 2 years ago when NAB snuck ahead of Commonwealth, but normal service has since been restored, with NAB in second place. Global markets mostly rose last night and today. Small moves all round on commodity markets. Gold, copper and oil up, iron ore down. And the Australian dollar snuck up a few points to 65.3 US cents. Now, there's a lot of focus at the moment on China's economic slowdown, but it's actually following a well-worn path. When Japan's and Korea's per capita GDP reached $7,000 US, their economic growth maxed out and started to decline. China is doing the same thing at the same rate. But China is not following Japan as a destination for Australian exports. It is buying twice as much as a percentage of Australian GDP as Japan did in the 70s and 80s. In fact, China is as important to the Australian economy now as Britain was in the early 20th century. And that's finance.
Victorian police have warned die-hard Taylor Swift fans to watch out for ticket scams for the pop star's upcoming Melbourne shows. Police say they've received at least 250 reports of ticketing scams linked to the concert since July last year. People caught up in them have mostly been targeted through social media and have lost more than $260,000. In a bid to prevent a practice known as tailor-gating, the MCG is urging fans who didn't manage to get tickets to steer clear of the venue on all 3 concert nights.
Arrangements are being put in place to ensure that for people who are going to the concert can move in and out of the MCG in a safe way, but also too for those who may be around the venue to ensure that is managed in an appropriately safe way.
To sport, Australia has lost the second one-day international against South Africa in Sydney after a brilliant performance from Marizanne Kapp saw her side cruise to victory in the rain-affected match, setting up a series decider in Sydney on Saturday. Rain stopped play several times and reduced the game to 45 overs each after Australia won the toss and elected to bowl. Laura Woolvart lasted 3 balls before the Proteas middle order steadied the innings. Kapp made her 3rd straight half-century as South Africa set Australia a DLS revised total of 234 for victory. Kapp also secured the crucial wickets of Australia captain Elisa Healy and Beth Mooney early in the home side's innings, and the wickets kept tumbling with the home side slumping to 8 for 71. A superb 9th wicket stand between Ash Gardner and Kim Garth added some respectability, but South Africa was always in control, securing an 84-run win. Former Australian captain Ricky Ponting says he's taken on a coaching role in the T20 Major Cricket League so he can be a part of the sport's growth in the United States. Ponting has been appointed to coach of the Washington Freedom for the 2nd season of the competition. The league will follow the Men's T20 World Cup, which will be held in the US and the Caribbean. Ponting believes the Major Cricket League will help the sport's bid to crack the American market.
I'd heard a lot about it, heard a lot of great things about it. And I think it's just the tip of the iceberg was where cricket potentially heads in the US. So I just felt it was a really good opportunity for me to get involved now.
A-League record goal scorer Michelle Heyman has been selected in the Matildas squad for a crucial Olympic qualifier to replace WA's Sam Kerr. Heyman comes into the Matildas squad for 2 games against Uzbekistan at the end of the month, which the Matildas need to win to secure an Olympic berth. The 36-year-old Canberra United striker has scored 10 goals this season to become the first woman in the A-League to score 100 goals. Heyman hasn't played for the Matildas for 6 years, during which she took a year out of the game for mental health reasons.
I feel like I'm 21 again. It's a great feeling. It's been 6 years since I've put on the green and gold and represented my country. And for myself to get this call up was just, it's changed my life.
To the weather, and I think we're all just bracing for the heat. Let's take a look at the temperatures from today. Right now in town it's 30 degrees and humidity's 28%. Perth's minimum was 17.4 degrees just before 1 a.m. this morning, rising to a top of 36 around 3 o'clock this afternoon. The state's coolest spot was Ayr, which recorded a minimum of 6 degrees, while in the north the state's highest maximum was 44. That was reached at Shark Bay and Medora. To the satellite, cloud over the state's north generated some decent falls across the Kimberley overnight and into today. Meanwhile, a west coast trough is continuing to deepen, and along with a firm ridge over the south, it will direct very hot temperatures into the southwest corner over the coming days. A quick look around the country for tomorrow. Mostly sunny for Melbourne, some cloud around for Sydney, Canberra and Hobart, and showers for Brisbane and Darwin. Back to WA. In the north, more showers and gusty thunderstorms expected over the Kimberley. A windy morning over the Gascoyne, Central West and Northern Goldfields. It's also looking very hot for central parts of the state and across the southwest, with tops reaching the high 30s. Those hot temperatures combined with dry, fresh and gusty winds could lead to elevated fire dangers. Perth is also heading for a sunny and warm top of 39 degrees from an overnight low of 22. Sunrise will be at 5:47, setting at 14 minutes past 7. And looking ahead, conditions will continue to warm up as Perth enters another heat wave, reaching 41 on Friday and Saturday, down to 38 on Sunday. And that's ABC News for now. I'll be back with you tomorrow. In the meantime, you can stay up to date with ABC News online, or you can catch the news anytime on ABC iView. Stay with us now for 7:30.